It's not easy being green, having to spend each day in the color of the leaves, when it could be nicer being red, yellow or gold, something much more colorful like that.
Good evening and welcome to this edition of GreenTV. I'm your host, Kathleen Pettijohn. Frances Moore Lappe is the author of many books, including Diet for a Small Planet and her latest, Hope's Edge. This past June, Ms. Lappe spoke at the Wellsprings of Wisdom conference held at St. Mary's College in Notre Dame, Indiana. This is the second part of her speech in which she presents the social and economic impact of our diet and way of life on the rest of us on the planet. Tonight, we present part 2 of Frances Moore Lappe's speech at St. Mary's College.
I was at a Starbucks recently, and I didn't want anything sweet, so I read for an egg salad sandwich. I thought that would be a little innocuous. And I turned it over, and there were 20 ingredients on it, including high fructose corn syrup in an egg salad sandwich. So now today, it is estimated that 1 out of every 9 of our healthcare dollars is going to obesity-related disease. And the health cost is rivaling that from tobacco-related disease. And this is expected to get much, much worse because of the epidemic of childhood diabetes. So let me just review, and by the way, I'm quickly getting to the good news part. So I've been looking for this causal pattern all my life. And just to summarize where I am right now, for me it starts with who we think we are. Do we really believe that we're nothing but these selfish little selves out there to get ours? And meaning materially get ours, and elbow the other person aside. Once we believe that, then we do acquiesce to this market that is degrading that which throughout human evolution was considered precious, and that is food itself, the earth itself, as we are degrading it through topsoil erosion and the pollution of our well water and the runoff into the Gulf of Mississippi, many of you may know, that once we believe this about ourselves, we acquiesce to the degradation of that which has always been considered sacred. And we acquiesce then to this, we believe that we have to turn over our fate to the market, and we accept that there's only one type of market, highest return to existing wealth. And so therefore that leads to then this increasing concentration, which then makes us all feel, as I was saying this morning, like we're in this nightmarish sort of musical chairs game where the music is going fast and we're walking and walking knowing that the chairs are being pulled away and we might end up not just on the floor without a chair but on the street. And so we live in, this leads to a culture of fear, and for most people in a state of fear, the last thing you want to do is take risks, to have new thoughts, to experiment, to challenge. And so here then the circle becomes complete with this dim view of ourselves leading to give away our power, ultimately ending up creating a culture of fear which makes us even feel less powerful. So that is something of the causal pattern that I believe is putting us in this world that none of us feel that we're choosing, and yet it's just happening. And what I'm suggesting now I will turn my focus. Because remember in the beginning I said that actually we're moving very fast in 2 directions at once. And so we're living this era in which the choices are more clear than perhaps for any generations on this planet Earth. Because at the very same moment of this tightening of economic control, creating this culture of fear here and throughout the world, something else is underway that is absolutely extraordinary. that I could never have imagined blossoming even a short time ago. And I love to call it the revolution in human dignity, because it is a revolution that is from the bottom by people, many of them women, if not most of them women, but people throughout the world saying, no, 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 I am not that shabby caricature. Sure, I want to, have nice things like everyone does, but I am much more complex than that. And I know that I would be much happier to be in a community that was working for everyone, where everyone had access to health care and a good education, where everyone had access to healthy food. I know that is in me too, and I reject that shabby caricature, and therefore I will affirm these pieces of myself that are denied by the dominant mental map. I will affirm them, I will claim them. And Anna and I, in our book, we boil these missing pieces of ourselves down to two aspects that are part of our complex nature that have been denied. And we call it the need to connect and affect, the need to connect with one another in genuine community, not just through common brand names, but in genuine community, and to affect the wider world, not just our own survival, but to know that our lives are genuinely making a difference. Because I would say that our species, again, could never have gotten here if we weren't fundamentally problem solvers. If we were just couch potatoes and passive observers, we would never have gotten to where we are as a species. So claiming this need to connect and affect, and I remember in Eric Fromm's book, that same one I mentioned earlier, he so believed that human deep need to make a dent. He took the Descartes, I think, therefore I am, and he said, I affect, therefore I am. That is so deep, our need for agency, that it creates depression. And I just want to add here that the fourth leading cause of disability throughout the world today, of lost life and disability in terms of being able to work, the fourth leading cause in the world today is depression. And this is the pandemic that no one is talking about. And my hunch is that global pandemic, depression, is because of the denial of these deep needs that we have, we humans. So this revolution of human dignity, what does it look like? How do we connect to it? I believe it's people who are seeing this pattern and finding their entry points. And so when Anna and I traveled the world together, we saw in Bangladesh, in India, in Kenya, and in Brazil, in Europe, and here, each place, different entry points, but all shifting this pattern and saying, no, I am not this, I am a person with innate dignity, with a need to connect to the community, and a need to affect. So let me just start in Brazil, and I will take you through just a few of the stories of our journey. Let me take you first to Brazil, and why we went to Brazil. Well, we went to Brazil in part because I was just so shaken by what had happened. While my attention over about 15 years had shifted more here to the U.S. after the founding of Food First and the writing of Food First, the book, where we had looked at Brazil at that point back in the late 70s and realized that any attempt to address the roots of hunger, to have a genuine land reform, had been put down violently by the wealthy landlords who owned in the land. I mean, in Brazil, something like 1% of the landowners control something like 40% of the rural area and leave huge swaths of it uncultivated. And I knew, as I say, any attempt to change that had been put down with peasant blood. So when my daughter and I decided to write this book and to go to see what is emerging that we can learn from and bring home and share, I had to put Brazil on the list. Because while I wasn't looking, what had emerged through the, in part through the Catholic social teachings of liberation theology, in part through the inspiration, by the way, of One of the founders of this movement I'm about to describe was inspired by the Cesar Chavez of the farm workers movements here. But in the early 80s, a movement began in rural Brazil that has become the largest social movement in this hemisphere. It is called the Landless Workers Movement, or the MST for its initials in Portuguese. And so while I thought, no, this can't be, people had come together and risked everything. And I say risked everything because, well, let me just tell you what they've achieved. Over this last 20 years, they have settled on 15 to 17 million acres of land. They have settled about a third of 1 million families, creating whole new communities, creating new businesses, new farms, drastically lowering infant mortality, which is a measure of malnutrition, introducing organic seed lines in Brazil, and claiming their dignity, their fullness, because they are in community, very close community, setting their own rules and working through a national organization that is also trying to shift the policies of the whole country of Brazil. So Anna and I had the privilege of going to Brazil and actually sitting in the homes of people who were part of this movement, who had risked everything. And I say there that more people in this movement had been killed for their efforts for justice than were disappeared under the military dictatorship that came before this period. So they have had to risk their lives for what they have achieved. And as we sat in their homes, their temporary homes, while they waited for a permanent title to the land, let me add here, what they were doing is that in the Constitution, in the middle of the 80s, there was a new Constitution written in Brazil. Can you imagine being alive when your Constitution is being rewritten? And the people of Brazil, including the urbanites, were so distressed by the landless people flooding into the cities where there were no facilities and increasing the crime rates there, and realizing this was untenable, that they joined the rural people in voting for a clause in the Constitution in Brazil that says if there's idle land serving no social function, it is the government's responsibility to redistribute it to those who will use it for social good, who will farm it for their families. So they had the legal basis, but they had to implement it through civil disobedience, through basically taking over land that was lying idle and staking claim to it, and then insisting that the government follow through on its responsibilities to redistribute it. This is how the landless workers movement has worked. So Anna and I got there, and we got to go visit some developed communities, but also sit into the plastic shacks. They were plastic, I mean that they were poles with black plastic wrapped around them. And this was a very cold Brazilian winter, and Brazil gets really cold. I'd seen too many bikini pictures, you know, and I didn't believe it, so I didn't take what I needed to stay warm. But we sat and talked to these folks. And I just wanted to share with you one conversation where I just learned that these people who had gone to all this effort to create these new communities were developing the first organic seed line. And I said, oh, this is really interesting. Are you going organic? Because you yourselves were day laborers before. These were all landless people who now had getting their own title to grow food for their families. And I said, are you doing this because you were hurt, and so therefore you don't want to expose yourself to the pesticides again? And these families looked at me and Anna as if, yeah, but you don't really get it. I'll still remember that look. And what they went on to explain, they said, what you've got to understand is that, of course, why would we risk our lives? Why would we go to all this effort and work for years only to create a product that might be harmful to someone else, to the consumer? And I don't know if it strikes you the way it does me, but I have thought about that so many times. What it says to me is that when human beings feel that we are empowered, when we know that our choices do count, when we can see the ripples, then we are able to take ownership, take responsibility for the impact. When we work in a factory in the United States where we feel like we're just a cog in the machine, it's much, much harder to think about, is this really safe for the consumer? But these people knew that they were in charge, and so they were taking responsibility for the impact on the consumer, and I was deeply moved. We also went to Brazil because we learned just before we left for Brazil that there was a city that in 1993 had declared food a human right. Now this is a very capitalist country, looks on the surface very much like the United States. At least this, it's kind of like San Francisco, very hilly. It's called Belo Horizonte, beautiful horizon. It's a huge city, the third or fourth largest in Brazil, had declared food a right of citizenship. Basically, the city fathers and mothers said, look, if you're too poor to buy the food that you need to eat in the market, you're still a citizen. And therefore, we, the city officials, are still accountable to you. And therefore, we're going to work with citizens groups and religious groups and unions to make sure that the market doesn't exclude you. That no matter what, you have access to good, healthy food. I'm not talking about just any kind of food, good, healthy food. And that framing, back to the mental map, they changed the mental map. They said food was a human right, a right of citizenship. It released all sorts of creativity in the city. For example, they took the small amount of money that was coming from the Brazilian federal government for school lunches, and instead of buying corporate processed food with it, they bought fresh organic food from local farmers and greatly increased the livelihoods of the local farmers. They created, they welcomed the local farmers in the area to come in, the organic produce farmers, and to sell their food in the inner city, right in these little plots around the bus stops and here and there that the city owned, and charged these farmers virtually nothing, on the condition that they would keep this fabulous produce within the price range of the poor in the inner city. And they would take them out into the outlying favelas on the weekends so that they could have produce. They created a people's restaurant downtown that anybody can eat in. It's not just a poor people's restaurant, but the price is something like a third or a quarter at the market price. And so you see soldiers eating there, you see elders who are coming there for social interchange, and you see young families, you see everyone there, and they sell thousands of meals a day in the people's restaurant. They post the price of where you can get the cheapest food. They post it in the bus stops where poor people go so that they know where to go to get the bargains. And what does this do? It puts downward pressure. You probably know that in our country, in the poorest community, it's where the highest prices are. It's crazy. So this put downward pressure on that gouging. And they also they took waste. Again, the change in frame, they started seeing what they had thrown out, they started seeing it as valuable. And so they took things like manioc leaves, which had a lot of minerals and eggshells, a lot of nutrients, and they ground them into a powder and put them into a flour and made them available to every nursery school child in Belo Horizonte, and all the school children. They started to see the increase in nutritional well-being. And so Anna and I, at the end of our visit to Belo Horizonte, we had the privilege of sitting down with Adriana Aranha, the woman who was the coordinator. And she explained to us that all of these programs, already reducing malnutrition significantly in her city, cost 1% of the city budget. 1%, because the city's role was coordination and setting fairer rules so that everyone could participate in the market. It was, in a sense, as I'll talk about later, putting a values boundary around the market so that it can truly work for all of us. And so I said, Adriana, wait a minute, when you started this, did you realize how out of step you were with the rest of the world? I mean, in the United States, all we hear is that the market can do no harm, and government can do no good, The market is the be-all and end-all, and government is the enemy. And you're saying that actually that the government has a positive role to play and can work to actually make the market work better? I said, do you realize that you're going against the tide? And at that point, Adriana started going on and on and on in Portuguese, and I don't understand a word of Portuguese. But I tried to be very patient with our interpreter until her eyes welled up with tears. And at that point, I lost my patience, and I elbowed the interpreter. I said, what's making Adriana cry? And he interpreted. He said that she had just told us that, yes, she knew how out of step she was with the dominant program that's being promoted throughout the world. And she knew how much hunger there was in the world. What she didn't know, and what upset her so, is how easy it is to end it. And obviously, I told this story before, and I cannot ever tell it without becoming very emotional myself. Because what Adriana is one of my heroes and many, many others I met on this journey, but what I felt she was saying to me is that it is easy if we can do two things. If we can shift that mental map, as they did in Belo Horizonte, so that we see food as it should be, a simple right of membership in community for all human beings. Make that shift of mental map and walk with fear of being different. And she was able to do both. And now, under the Lula government, the new government in Brazil, she is now a national advisor to bring this kind of initiative to other cities in Brazil. But I want to go for a moment to Kenya. How many of you were in my talk this morning? So maybe I'll go to India then, because many of you heard a lot of what I had to say, but I will return to it at the end. I want to go to India, where this photograph was taken by my daughter, the photographer. And the reason that we went to India is because through the work of a woman named Vandana Shiva, we're learning that what Joe Collins and I had written about in our book Food First, about the Green Revolution in India, which is the chemically dependent agriculture taking over there with pesticides and imported seeds that were bred and patented by the big multinational seed companies, yes, it had produced great abundance of grain, but also increasing hardship and increasing disenfranchisement by many, many poor farmers in India, where still the majority of farmers, the majority of people in India are still on the land. And so what Vandana was working with was a network of farmers throughout India who had gotten onto that chemical path, had experienced, and everyone we met throughout all of our journey who had been in agriculture had experienced pesticide harm of some kind, but certainly very much so in this is the foothills of the Himalayas. And Ann and I hiked up into the remote foothills. People had never, they'd never really talked to Westerners before, in order to meet with people who were saying yes to their traditions, their food traditions of seed saving and seed sharing, and working with scientists in Vandana Shiva's network to improve upon these ecologically benign and soil-enhancing techniques, which were always part of the Indian food tradition, but had been put aside when people were told and really lured into using the chemical approach, because initially, as they told us, the pesticides were subsidized by the Indian government, and then they got hooked on using them, and the pests then were the natural predators for the pests that attacked their crops had been removed, and so therefore they were on the pesticide treadmill. And so we hiked up into to meet these villagers. And this was also powerfully moving to us because as I end tonight, I'm going to show you just 4 minutes of slides that Anna took, where you will see what they are doing. And what they are doing is creating what they call bioregistries, where they're creating catalogs of all of their plant wealth and animal wealth, all of their heritage, creating bioregistries so that if a multinational firm comes into, some of you have heard about this patenting, what Vandana Shiva would call biopiracy, where corporations moving in and patenting indigenous plants. These communities are coming together and saying, no, this is our heritage. And these are the seeds that we save and then we share. And so every house in the villages we visited that were part of the seed sharing network had insignia over the door showing that they were seed sharers. And so it was this system where they got the seeds that were being bred with the help of the scientists working with Vandana, and they were given these if they would commit to grow them and then share them with others. So it was this radiating out in this beautiful pattern.